Hi there, and welcome to the iBAC Tech Trek podcast, where we explore the outer reaches of insurance technology. I'm your science officer on this journey, Tom Reid, and today I'm joined by Larry Nickel, VP of Corporate Business Development from SGI. Larry, how's it going?
Good. Good to be on the podcast and loving the shirt.
I get different reactions from people when they clue into the Tech Trek motif, but enough about that. Let's talk about you. So, Larry, how did you end up in your current chair as VP of Corporate Business Development for SGI?
Yeah, I joined, it was an interesting time. I joined SGI kind of right at the beginning of the COVID situation. At the time, it seemed like things were calming down a little bit, how naive I was at the time, but summer of 2020. So I've been here about 4 or 5 years now, and the role was interesting for me, kind of brought together some different stuff I've worked on in the past. SGI being, across the West was also a new challenge for me. I had been in Ontario previous to that and in a smaller company. So it was nice to get into a bigger organization again, and definitely, love the culture at SGI. The opportunity has been amazing. It's kind of evolved as I've gotten here, and I've gotten more and more involved in the broker technology side as opposed to just the brokers as business partners. So it's been a learning experience as well, which is great.
Awesome. SGI is, obviously well known across Western Canada. For those viewers in Ontario, maybe just give us the quick overview of SGI.
Yeah, so we obviously started out with the auto fund, the compulsory insurance in Saskatchewan right after the Second World War, when it was very hard to get insurance at the time, the population of the province and whatnot. So we started from those beginnings and quickly got into the competitive side of the business. And can't remember the exact date off the top of my head here, but we expanded into Manitoba and eventually into all the provinces from Ontario to BC on the competitive side of the business. And so SGI is the dominant market in Saskatchewan. There's no doubt about that. We've got the auto fund for the compulsory insurance. We do vehicle registration and a lot of the things affiliated with that. We also have pretty substantial market share on the competitive side of the business for personal lines and commercial lines, farm, et cetera. Pretty major player in Manitoba and Alberta as well, getting some business in BC. Earthquake is always a little challenge in BC. And then Ontario, we started a few years ago. We've got the Coachman brand, and then we've got SGI Canada as well there. And so small, but growing and growing pretty substantially. Ontario Auto is always a bit of a challenge to try to manage, but we're working through that as well.
There's one thing I hear consistently across the board from every insurer is Ontario Auto, and there's a little pause, and then the word challenging generally comes up.
Yeah. I've been dealing with Ontario Auto in one way or another, whether marketing, branding, underwriting, reinsurance, you name it, for most of my career, and I've rarely seen it when it's not challenging. I think for about 6 months during the lockdowns and COVID was probably the only time it was easy to deal with.
So SGI has made a significant investment into GuideWire. Can you tell us why and where you are and what you anticipate getting out of it?
Yeah, so we're just to give you a bit of quick background here. So we are in the midst of it right now. We started about actual implementation, probably not quite 18 months ago now. Started off with personal lines and worked our way through from smaller provinces for us in terms of the business we had, and working our way up to our biggest province, Saskatchewan. And so we're at the tail end of that actually right now. So Saskatchewan property renewals, which I think I saw a report, something like 300,000 or 400,000 policies are starting to renew now. So that's the big lift for us. We're kind of in the meat of that. I'll finish off that. So we are looking at commercial property coming up in a few months here, and then commercial auto kind of fitting in between that, farm at the same time as the commercial property. So that's kind of the end of the string for us in terms of the main program and getting from our legacy system onto the GuideWire system. In terms of the question you asked, part of it is like probably a lot of carriers you talk to, our legacy system was decades and decades old. It was proprietary in-house. I think the joke internally was there's probably 2 guys left on the planet that actually know how to code on the thing. So the risk is very, very high. It did seem like the industry we did look at a lot of options, actually. We had quite a few submissions In the end, the GuideWire platform seemed to be, the best for us and seemed to be the way the industry was going. And so there's a lot of standardization possible from that perspective. The big one right now, though, and it doesn't involve the brokers too directly, although certainly Saskatchewan brokers that are issuers for us on the auto fund side, our Drive platform is going live in a couple months. So that's kind of all hands on deck, even though a lot of us aren't directly involved. I'm going to characterize it as nervously excited about that one.
And that's another common theme that I've heard on many sides of the fence. So let's talk about brokers. So what is it that you're doing or plan to do with GuideWire that in fact improves a broker's ability to grow the business?
Yeah, and I'll say, it's that plan to do, although we are starting some things. So I'll pivot here in a second. But I'll be honest, in full transparency. The last 12 to 18 months, as you can imagine, have been hard because when you're into a project of this scale, and we did do, and I didn't mention this before, unlike some others, we chose, for better or for worse, to do Policy Center, Billing Center, and Claim Center all at once rather than pieces of it. So it's a big lift, even just doing one product line at a time or one province at a time. And so, I'll be honest, and we took it out of the box and we took an agile approach, which, as you know, is not much more than an MVP initially. And so there's a lot of build out needed. What you find is you not only pause anything new, you kind of go backwards a little bit in terms of what was being offered in the past. So that's kind of been the last year or so for us. Now, coming out of that, it wasn't like we, stopped everything. We were looking at different things, and a few of the things that we've been doing. We've been involved with CZO, as you well know, and iBAC in a few projects. So we're on the data standards working group and working through a lot of that. And part of that is now we're looking towards getting our API security certification, I'm hoping within the next couple months. I know this is being recorded, so I'll be careful what dates I throw out there. But another thing we're looking at, working on, I believe right now actually, is the eDocs, the standard coding for the subject labeling that I know is a real pain point for brokers in terms of the eDocs. So we are hoping to have that by May, actually. So that's another thing we've been working on that we hope will help with brokers being able to service their clients a little better. One of the things too, when we were converting to the new platform, is we didn't want to cause a lot of chaos for brokers in creating, substantially new products and rating methods, et cetera. As much as possible, we tried to keep that low key, but we did do some product redesign. And one of the things there is we did move to sort of more of what I would call industry norms and away from a lot of the unique stuff about SGI that, for brokers would create a lot of learnings if they were getting to know us. You mentioned Ontario, the brokers that may not be familiar with us. We got to an approach now where the products are a little more what the broker would expect. And so the learning curve can be much shorter on that front. We're back to CZO. We're on the InnoTech advisory group, and I think it's advisory committee, learning from that. The big ones, though, that are coming soon are while we were in the midst of this, commercial rating panels for commercial property really took off with some vendors. And so we are, after our commercial property release in a few months here, going to pivot and start work on that. We're hoping to have that in a pilot phase with at least one of the tools before the end of the year. Commercial auto, we need to, in Ontario and Alberta specifically, get onto the ARS quoting for our individually rated commercial auto. So that will be coming this year as well. And then the big one, obviously, is on the personal line side. We had APIs, we had real time with our legacy system. Unfortunately, with the instance of GuideWire that we have, we didn't have that. We did have a contingency built into the project. And so we knew we would be pivoting to rebuild that essentially. And so we've started that work now. We had to figure out some stuff at our end with architecture and whatnot, just because of the cloud version of GuideWire that we have. So we've been working through that. And again, same thing. We hope to, for new business, personal property, quote bind issue, our plan is to have that in a pilot phase fairly shortly and really start to build that out towards the end of the year.
That's fantastic. And I do have to give a shout out to SGI and to yourself, Larry, for the support you've shown to brokers around the API sharing project that was, launched by iBAC when you got on board, and now obviously being managed by CSIO as well the eDocs. I mean, so those improved eDocs, those eventual APIs, those are all things that really boil down to helping that serviceability. So Larry, SGI, was a leader in broker connectivity some time ago, and yet you decided with your GuideWire build to join into what was originally called the Wawanesa API sharing project. So why did you do that? What was it about this approach that caught your eye and made you guys decide that you wanted to jump on board?
Yeah, so our history, as you alluded to, was that we had built out a pretty robust offering, and we're still building out with our legacy system those APIs. We called it real-time data exchange, so our TDX was a major project for us. But we didn't really see the industry take up, and so what brokers said to us was, I have 5 or 10 markets. You guys are going to something that actually does look better, and we support it philosophically, conceptually. But it really doesn't make sense for us to change our workflows and change everything to meet one market when we've got all these other markets that really aren't doing it, and we're not really seeing it taken up by the rest of the industry. So we allowed that project to kind of just stay dormant essentially towards the end. And then once we were going to GuideWire, our instance of GuideWire on the cloud didn't have those APIs right out of the box for us. So we had built in a contingency because we felt like this was something that was going to circle back, that it wasn't just going to go away. And sure enough, like as you said, basically once we actually started the project, it felt like it was the next day. You reached out to me and the conversation started. And I've told this story a few times about being on the side of the road at a rest stop on the highway in Alberta and taking the call to jump into that first call, because it was really important for us to see whether the industry was really going to pick up the ball and run with it this time. And so that it wasn't just SGI trying with maybe 1 or 2 others to kind of carry that ball. So seems like that has changed. And so that contingency we've tapped, and we've started that work now on that, as I mentioned.
Well, that's fantastic, because and that's where the rubber hits the road is carriers actually executing on some of these desires, right? It's one thing to get 8 or 9 carriers together and everybody goes, yeah, we all get it, right? Brokers need to have a critical mass of carriers who are going down this road to make it worth it from their perspective to adopt this new approach. Next to impossible for a broker to do it with one carrier. If memory serves, you were one of the obviously besides Wawanesa, one of the very first to join, and having heavyweight carriers like Wawanesa and SGI kind of championing it really brought in a lot of the other players that did eventually relatively quickly sign up. Let me switch ever so slightly to broker associations. So when it comes to your development plan, so the features you're building, the approach you're taking, how important is input from the broker associations to that plan?
Yeah, so we definitely have a very good relationship with all the broker associations in the jurisdictions we deal with, including iBAC. We do sponsorships, et cetera. And so we, as much as possible, take a consultative approach. It was a bit of a challenge with GuideWire specifically because it is a known entity. We weren't building something from scratch, and we were taking it, as I said, out of the box and kind of that agile approach. That said, we did involve, and with iBAC in particular in Saskatchewan, we have a pretty special relationship, obviously, because of the size and scale of our operation there. But regardless, whether it was Saskatchewan or elsewhere, we created a few different things to work more closely with brokers, and I'll be honest, kind of learn from some of the transformations we've seen and some of the challenges that some of our competitors had run into. And so one of the things we came up with was something we called, and we coordinated this with a couple of the associations originally, was something called Transformation Liaison Network. And the idea was that we would, in a live real-time broadcast, work through kind of what the changes were coming, very specific to a product or product line, and then take questions from brokers and have it as a bit of an interactive session so that they could understand. So it wasn't just purely, here's our training, consume it. It was some back and forth. And then part of it was to listen and adapt. So some of the things that we rolled out whether we just misunderstood something, missed something, didn't land the way we hoped it would, we've done what we can to quickly adapt and adopt and make some changes on the fly as well. And again, a lot of that came through some of the broker associations, iBAC in particular, I will say, called to our attention some things that because it is hard. We had, a ServiceNow approach and what we called a hypercare center set up to take calls. And we're trying to track and learn when we would see consistent issues come up again and again. But the broker associations, I think, do a great job of sort of aggregating that stuff. And so they brought forward to us a couple times different lists of things that they were consistently seeing. So then we knew it wasn't just a one-off issue to deal with. And so we've done our best to address those. We still have some outstanding change requests that we're working through right now to address some of the feedback they've given us. But we did our best to involve them and take that consultative approach as much as possible.
Well, that's great. And I think that broker associations typically can provide a filtering approach or an aggregation approach or even a prioritization approach, because when you deal with hundreds and hundreds of brokers and probably thousands of broker individuals like you do, it can be very difficult to separate the signal from the noise, right? You get a lot of feedback, and which one is actually the most relevant, and which one's the highest priority, or which one just happened to happen to that guy this morning, and is top of mind for him, right? So I know I've been involved in a few things at iBAC where we're sort of bringing in things, trying to filter them and figure out which is the highest priority, and then feeding that back to the relevant carriers after having gone through and provided some value add to that process.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with change management is understanding recency bias. Like you said, whatever happened to me this morning, that's what I'm going to tell you the loudest about today.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's turn our thoughts to the future here for a second. So maybe if you want to cast your mind 2, 3, 4 years down the road, so you're past, the heavy lift of GuideWire, where do you see SGI taking that platform, your technology in general, as it relates to your interaction with brokers?
Yeah, I'm sure we're not the only one to say this, but I think, Tom, it's fair to say that as a strategy and just as a long-term value proposition, we've come to realize that you're not always going to win on price. You're not always going to win on product, and you're not going to win necessarily on technology. That analogy that everybody likes about the plumbing and the connections. I like, for me, the visual is more extension cords. I disc jockeyed when I was in high school, and I just remember the massive amounts of wires going everywhere back then. And I just think one clean extension cord running through it all would have been so nice. So a lot of it is not about trying to compete on that kind of stuff anymore. It is more about standardization of that. So where are we going to win? We're going to win on experience. We used to say win on service, but I think it's more than that. It's winning on experience. And so we've had conversations internally about something we're calling elevated experience. And so, whether it's self-serve, whether it's seamless, whether it's once and done, like there's all sorts of things you can sort of incorporate into that. But what we've come to realize in the last little while is, and going through this process and some of the things you and I have just talked about, is to do that, we really need to get the broker's perspective on that. And so we do have our own folks involved in an experience area. We definitely want to involve our product people, some of my area, in conversations with brokers in multiple methods. So it may be sitting down with a broker, and if they're willing to kind of show us how they do their job every day, just to really get that in-depth understanding. Could be surveys, could be focus groups. We're looking at a lot of different things, but we definitely want to get that ground up perspective on how brokers are working. As you know, and you kind of alluded to this, 10, 15, 20 years ago, brokers were pretty homogeneous. There was a certain broker and there was 1,000 of that same broker out there. These days, not so much, but there's still a lot of commonality in how they do things. And particularly what broker management system they work from, et cetera. And so we really want to get that deep understanding of how they do things. And then what does that mean to us to be able to, we use the phrase, enable the broker to give that elevated experience to the end customer. And so that's going to be the big focus over the next 2 or 3 years. So I don't have, I can't give you a lot of specificity around we're going to do this and then we're going to do that and we're going to do this. A lot of it right now is we've got our platform, we've got our base. We can now start looking at more sophisticated pricing and products. But we really want to understand what that experience piece looks like. One of the things that we learned from our experience before, you summarized it there about, it's hard for one carrier to move things forward when the rest don't follow. Broker consolidation has changed things in the sense that some of these big brokers now are very big and can actually put some pressure on the carriers and the vendors and the consultants and integrators to get more standardization. And I think that's a good thing for all brokers. So even though, a big consolidator could maybe be a scary thing for a small broker, the one benefit they bring is they have a lot of influence in the market. And right now they are influencing standardization. And honestly, I think that's a good thing for all of us.
The world of insurance is changing because the world of tech is changing. Join us on the journey at ibactech.ca.